1323 BC, the Valley of the Kings, western Thebes. The last torch flickers against limestone walls painted with gods and stars. Priests withdraw backward through the narrow corridor, their white linen robes brushing against golden shrines that fill the burial chamber. The air is thick with frankincense and myrrh, sacred resins meant to purify the space between worlds. Outside, the sun climbs over the cliffs, casting long shadows across the desert valley where 50 generations of kings now sleep. Inside the sealed chamber, a young pharaoh lies wrapped in linen, his face covered by a mask of beaten gold. Around him rest everything he will need: bread, beer, oils, weapons, furniture, chariots. But these objects are not simply grave goods. They are tools for a journey that every Egyptian believed was more real than life itself. For 3,000 years, the people of the Nile prepared for this moment with a certainty that shaped pyramids, temples, and an entire civilization. They did not hope for an afterlife. They knew it existed. They had mapped it, named its demons, written spells to navigate its dangers. This is the truth about the afterlife in ancient Egypt, not as myth, but as the Egyptians themselves understood it. The story begins not in grand temples or royal tombs, but in the rhythm of the Nile itself. Every year, for as long as anyone could remember, the river rose. Fields drowned beneath muddy water. Villages waited. Then, slowly, the flood receded, leaving behind black silt that transformed barren sand into fertile earth. From death came life. From darkness came growth. The Egyptians watched this cycle repeat itself generation after generation, and they understood something fundamental. Death was not an ending. It was a transformation. Before 3100 BCE, in the predynastic period, Egyptians buried their dead in simple oval pits at the desert's edge. The hot sand naturally desiccated the bodies, preserving skin and hair. Families placed pottery vessels beside the deceased, containers filled with food and beer. Even then, before the pyramids, before the pharaohs, before writing itself, the people of the Nile believed the dead continued to exist. They would need sustenance. They would hunger and thirst. When Egypt unified under the first dynasties around 3100 BC, these simple beliefs grew more elaborate. Tombs became mud, brick structures called mastabas. The bodies inside were wrapped in linen soaked with resin. But something crucial remained unchanged. The dead were not gone. They had merely relocated. By the Old Kingdom 2006, 186-2001, 181 BC, Egyptian theology had crystallized into a complex system. The universe operated according to Mat, a concept that meant truth, justice, balance, and cosmic order all at once. Mat was not abstract philosophy. It was the fundamental force that kept the sun rising, the Nile flooding, and society functioning. When a person died in alignment with Mat, when they had lived justly, spoken truth, honored the gods, they could continue existing in a perfected realm. The earliest religious texts we possess come from the pyramid of King Unas at Saqqara, completed around 2345 BC. Carved into the burial chamber walls in vertical columns of hieroglyphs, these pyramid texts were not stories or hymns. They were instructions, spells, formulas to be recited so the dead king could navigate the dangers waiting beyond death. The sky is overcast, the stars are darkened. One spell begins. The bones of earth gods tremble. The planets stand still at seeing the king appearing in power, a god who lives on his fathers, who feeds on his mothers. These texts reveal a sophisticated cosmology. The deceased king, and only the king in these early centuries, would transform into a star. He would join the sun god Ra on his daily journey across the sky. He would become one with Osiris, the god of the dead who had himself died and been resurrected. The afterlife was not a shadowy underworld of ghosts. It was a cosmic existence among the gods themselves, But this eternal life was not automatic. It required preparation. The body had to be preserved. The Egyptians believed the soul needed a physical home to return to. The tomb had to be stocked with provisions. The correct rituals had to be performed. The proper spells had to be spoken. Most crucially, the deceased had to have lived according to Maat. They had to be morally justified. The Egyptians did not separate religion from ethics. A person who had stolen, murdered, lied, or oppressed others had violated Maat. They had introduced chaos into the ordered universe. Such a person faced not heaven or hell in the later sense, but something the Egyptians feared more deeply: complete annihilation, permanent non-existence. By the Middle Kingdom 2055–1650 BC, these beliefs had democratized. What began as royal privilege gradually extended downward through Egyptian society. Nobles commissioned their own coffins inscribed with spells, the coffin texts, adapted from the older pyramid formulas. Merchants, scribes, even skilled workers began preparing for their own journey through death. The afterlife was no longer reserved for kings alone. Any Egyptian who could afford the proper burial, who had lived justly, who knew the right words to speak when challenged by demons and gods, could hope to achieve what they called Ak, the transformed, glorified state of the blessed dead. This democratization reflected a profound shift in Egyptian thought. The afterlife remained as real, as certain, as the Nile's annual flood, but now it was a destination available to all who prepared wisely and lived well. To understand Egyptian belief in the afterlife, one must first understand their concept of the soul, which was not singular but multiple. The Egyptians did not believe in a soul, as later cultures would. They understood human existence as composed of several distinct elements, each with its own nature and destiny. The physical body was called the Khat, the flesh and bone that required preservation. But inhabiting and surrounding this body were several spiritual components, each essential for existence beyond death. The Ka was life force itself, created at birth by the ram-headed god Kh, Num on his potter's wheel. The Ka was a person's vital energy, their double. It required sustenance, which is why tombs were stocked with food and drink, and why surviving family members brought offerings to the tomb chapel. The Ka did not leave Egypt. It remained near the body, dwelling in the tomb, sustained by offerings or by magical substitutes painted on the walls. The Ba was closer to what we might call personality or individual character. Depicted as a human-headed bird, the Ba could move freely between the tomb and the world of the living. It could fly out during the day, visit familiar places, feel the sun's warmth. But each night it had to return to the body. The Ba and the Ka needed to reunite for the person to continue existing. If they were separated permanently, the person would cease to be. The Ib was the heart, but not merely the organ. The Egyptians understood the heart as the seat of intelligence, memory, emotion, and moral character. The heart recorded every action, every word, every thought. It was a witness that could not lie. This would become crucial because in the afterlife, the heart itself would testify about the life its owner had lived. The Ak was not possessed by the living. It was what one became if everything went right after death, the transformed, glorified spirit that dwelled among the stars and gods. To become an Ak was the goal of all funerary preparation. Those who achieved it were called the Aku, the effective, powerful, transfigured dead. These components had to be preserved, protected, and reunited. Which is why the mythology of Osiris became central to Egyptian understanding of death. Osiris had been a king, the first king, according to myth, who taught Egyptians agriculture and civilization. His jealous brother Set murdered him, dismembered his body, and scattered the pieces across Egypt. Osiris's wife Isis searched tirelessly, recovering every piece. With the help of Anubis, the jackal, headed god of embalming, She reassembled Osiris and wrapped him in linen. Through magical incantations, she restored him to life, not in the mortal world, but in the Duat, the realm of the dead. There Osiris became king and judge of the afterlife. Every Egyptian who died hoped to follow Osiris's path. Their body would be dismembered by death and reconstructed through mummification. They would be wrapped like Osiris was wrapped. They would speak the spells Isis had spoken, and if successful, they would rise as Osiris had risen, not to return to mortal life, but to live forever in the realm beyond. Anubis, who had embalmed the first body, presided over all subsequent mummifications. He would guide the deceased through the Duat's dangers. He would supervise the critical moment when their worthiness was judged. By the New Kingdom 1550-1070 BC, the religious texts had evolved once more. The Book of the Dead, which the Egyptians called the Book of Coming Forth by Day, became the standard collection of spells. These were written on papyrus scrolls, customized for individual buyers, and placed in the coffin or burial chamber. Some were elaborate and beautifully illustrated, commissioned by wealthy nobles. Others were simpler, mass-produced versions purchased by those of modest means. The Book of the Dead contained roughly 200 spells, though no single scroll included them all. There were spells for transforming into different creatures: a falcon, a lotus flower, a phoenix; spells for breathing, for eating and drinking, for not walking upside down; spells for remembering one's own name; and most important, spell 125, the words to be spoken during the weighing of the heart, when the deceased would stand before 42 divine judges and declare their innocence of every crime that violated man. Access to this knowledge still depended on wealth and literacy. A poor farmer might be buried with a single amulet and a prayer spoken by his family. A high priest would rest surrounded by papyri, amulets, protective statues, and walls covered floor to ceiling with magical texts. But the democratization that began in the Middle Kingdom had spread the core belief throughout Egyptian society. The afterlife existed, the path was knowable, and anyone who prepared properly and lived justly could hope to walk it successfully. Angle 1. The human/emotional perspective for the living. Death was not abstract theology. It was the loss of a father, a wife, a child. A letter survives from the New Kingdom, written by a widower to his deceased wife. He inscribed it on a bowl placed at her tomb. "What have I done to you that I should come to this evil state in which I am?" He writes, "What have I done to you? You have brought suffering upon me, though I did nothing evil to you." The man believes his wife's spirit is causing him misfortune. He pleads his case, listing everything he did for her while she lived, everything he provided for her burial. The letter reveals raw emotion, grief mixed with anger, love tangled with accusation. But underlying it all is certainty. She still exists. She can hear him. She has power to affect his life. This was the daily reality of Egyptian belief. The dead were not gone. They dwelt nearby, in the cemetery at the desert's edge, in tombs that families visited on festival days. Children grew up knowing their grandfather still needed bread and beer, that grandmother could bless or curse depending on whether she was properly remembered. Parents naming newborns often chose names honoring the dead. Osiris is content, or mate, or grant life. They sought protection from ancestors who had successfully navigated death and achieved the state of Ak. These transfigured dead were powerful allies. They could intercede with the gods. They could warn the living of dangers in dreams. But they could also punish neglect. Tomb inscriptions contain curses against those who would steal offerings or desecrate the burial place. "As for any man who shall disturb my burial," warns one Middle Kingdom official, "I shall seize him like a bird, and I shall be judged with him in the council of the great God." The fear of being forgotten was profound. Worse than death itself was the prospect of having no one speak your name, bring offerings, or maintain your tomb. Without sustenance, the ka would starve. Without remembrance, the person would fade into non-existence. A second death more final than the first. Angle 2. The priestly/ritual perspective. The priests who served the dead operated according to precise protocols established over centuries. Every major tomb had an endowment, land or resources set aside to fund a mortuary cult. Priests were hired, sometimes in perpetuity across generations, to perform daily rituals at the tomb chapel. These were not symbolic gestures. The priests believed they were genuinely feeding and sustaining the ka of the deceased. Each morning, the ritual followed a pattern. The priest would approach the false door, a carved limestone portal that marked the boundary between the living world and the tomb interior. He would burn incense to purify the space. Then he would present offerings, bread, beer, meat, vegetables, sometimes fresh flowers. As he placed each item on the offering table, he recited formulas, an offering which the king gives, and Anubis, foremost of the divine booth, lord of the sacred land. May he give invocation offerings of bread and beer, oxen and fowl, for the ka of the revered one. The words themselves had power, even if actual food ran out, as it inevitably did when family lines died out or endowments were exhausted. The spoken formulas could magically create sustenance. Painted images of food on tomb walls served the same function. The hieroglyphs spelling bread could become bread through ritual activation. The most critical ceremony was the opening of the mouth, performed on the mummy before burial. Using specialized tools, an adze, a pesesh, kef blade, an iron implement shaped like a serpent's tail, the priest touched the mummy's mouth, eyes, ears, and nose. With each touch, he recited spells to restore these senses to the deceased. Your mouth is opened by Ta. The priest would declare, the bonds on your mouth are loosened by your local god. Horus comes and opens your mouth. He has opened the mouth of the dead as he once opened the mouth of Osiris. The ceremony was based on the myth of Horus restoring his father Osiris. It was reenacted for every properly buried Egyptian, transforming an inert corpse into a living spirit capable of seeing, breathing, speaking, and consuming offerings in the afterlife. Priests also served as guides and scribes. They sold books of the dead, customizing them with the buyer's name inserted into the spells. They advised families on proper tomb construction. They supervised the mummification process, though the actual hands-on work was done by specialized embalmers who formed their own professional guild. These priests possessed knowledge considered essential for survival beyond death. They were the technicians of eternity, the engineers of immortality. Angle 3. The architectural/material perspective. The tomb was not a grave. It was a house for eternity. Architects designed them with multiple chambers, each serving specific functions. The burial chamber itself, hidden deep underground or carved into cliff faces, held the mummy in its nested coffins. But equally important was the chapel at ground level, where the living could come to present offerings. Between these spaces stood the false door, often the tomb's most elaborately decorated element. Carved to resemble a real doorway with a rolled-up mat, it featured the deceased's name, titles, and image. This was the portal through which the ka could emerge to receive offerings, and then return to the burial chamber to reunite with the body. The walls were covered with scenes that served multiple purposes. Images of the deceased overseeing their estate, hunting in the marshes, or enjoying a feast were not mere decoration. Through magic, these scenes became real in the afterlife. The painted banquet provided eternal nourishment. The depicted servants became actual servants in the next world. Statues placed in the tomb served as backup bodies. If the mummy were destroyed, the ka could inhabit a statue instead. Wealthy tombs contained multiple statues. hidden in sealed chambers called serdabs with only narrow slits allowing incense smoke to reach them. The most numerous objects were Ushabti figures, small mummiform statuettes, sometimes hundreds per tomb. Inscribed with spell 6 from the Book of the Dead, each Ushabti was a magical servant. In the afterlife, when the deceased was called upon to perform labor, working the fields, clearing irrigation channels, the Ushabti would answer instead, "Here I am, I shall do it." Everything placed in the tomb was there for function, not sentiment. The cosmetic jars contained real oils for grooming. The board games provided actual entertainment. The weapons were genuine, meant for protection against demons. Even food was carefully chosen. Bread that wouldn't spoil quickly, dried meat, sealed jars of honey and wine. The tomb itself was oriented carefully. Most faced west, toward the setting sun and the realm of the dead. Some Old Kingdom pyramids aligned with specific stars. The entrance passages of certain tombs were positioned so that on specific dates, perhaps the deceased's birthday or the anniversary of their death, sunlight would penetrate deep inside, symbolically reviving the mummy. Tomb robbery was epidemic despite harsh punishments, because everyone knew these structures were filled with gold, jewelry, and valuable goods. But robbers risked more than execution. Tomb inscriptions warned of supernatural consequences. "As for any person who shall enter this tomb in their impurity, I shall seize them by the neck like a bird, and the fear of me shall be cast into them." Yet the tombs were built knowing they would likely be violated eventually. Which is why the spells, the images, the very architecture itself was designed with redundancy. The afterlife did not depend on gold remaining in the tomb. It depended on the name being remembered, the offerings being made, or at least depicted, and the deceased having lived in accordance with Mat. Angle 4. The theological/mythological perspective, the Duat was not a vague shadowland. It was a place with geography, inhabitants, and rules. Egyptian texts describe it as existing beneath the earth, yet also in the western desert where the sun sets. It was a mirror realm, a dark counterpart to the living world. The Duat had rivers like the Nile, but they flowed with fire or blood. It had fields, but they grew strange vegetation. It had cities populated by gods, demons, and the transfigured dead. The journey through this realm was perilous. The deceased had to pass through 12 gates, each guarded by a deity who demanded to know the gate's secret name. "I will not let you pass by me," declares one guardian, "unless you tell me my name." The correct answer was not intuitive. One gate was called Mistress of Trembling, High of Walls, Sovereign Lady, Mistress of Destruction, who arranges the words which drive back the storm. Cloud. To pass, the deceased had to know this precisely. One word wrong, and the gate remained closed. Beyond the gates lurked demons with names like Backward, Faced, Eater of Excrement, and He Who Lives on Snakes. These were not metaphors. The Egyptians depicted them in intricate detail in tomb paintings and papyri. One demon had a crocodile head on a lion's body. Another was a serpent with human legs. They existed to torment or destroy the unprepared dead. But the Duat also contained allies. The 4 sons of Horus, Seti, Hapi, Duamutef, and Kebesenuf, protected the deceased's internal organs, which were removed during mummification and stored in canopic jars. The goddess Nephthys offered water to the thirsty. The ferryman Achan operated a boat that could carry the deceased across the dangerous waters that separated different regions of the Duat. Most important was knowledge. The spells in the Book of the Dead were essentially a survival manual. Spell 15 allowed the deceased to join the sun god Ra's boat on its nightly journey through the Duat. Spell 64 enabled transformation into different forms to escape danger. Spell 87 prevented transformation into a serpent against one's will. The Duat was also a place of judgment and purification. It was where cosmic order was enforced. Those who had violated Ma'at during life would face consequences here, not as eternal punishment in a later sense, but as obstacles that would prevent them from reaching the field of reeds, the paradise where the justified dead dwelled forever. The Egyptians mapped this invisible realm as carefully as they mapped the Nile Valley. They named its regions, catalogued its inhabitants, and provided directions for navigating it. The afterlife was not mysterious to them. It was known territory, dangerous but traversable for those properly prepared. Angle 5, the social/economic perspective death, like life, reflected Egypt's rigid social hierarchy. The cost of proper burial preparation varied enormously. According to Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt in the 5th century BC, embalmers offered 3 tiers of mummification. The most expensive treatment took 70 days. Embalmers removed the brain through the nose with iron hooks. They made an incision in the left side and extracted all internal organs except the heart. They washed the body cavity with palm wine and spices, then filled it with myrrh, cassia, and other aromatics. They covered the body with natron, a naturally occurring salt, for 40 days to desiccate it completely. Finally, they wrapped it in hundreds of meters of linen, inserting protective amulets between the layers. The whole process could cost as much as a year's income for a prosperous official. The middle-tier treatment skipped organ removal. Instead, embalmers injected cedar oil into the body through the rectum, sealed the opening, and let the oil dissolve the internal organs naturally while the body soaked in natron. This took less time and fewer expensive materials. The cheapest option was simple washing, natron treatment, and basic wrapping. Poor farmers and laborers received this minimal preparation. If they could afford even that much, a similar divide existed in tomb construction. Royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings took years to excavate and decorate, employing teams of specialized artisans who lived in the workers' village of Deir el-Medina. These tombs descended hundreds of feet into bedrock, with multiple chambers and corridors covered in painted reliefs. Wealthy nobles commissioned rock-cut tombs with elaborate false facades, multiple rooms, and walls painted by the same artisans who worked on royal projects. They could afford stone sarcophagi, multiple coffins nested inside each other, and complete papyrus copies of the Book of the Dead with custom illustrations. Middle-class Egyptians, scribes, minor officials, successful merchants, might afford a small rock-cut tomb or a mud-brick structure in the cemetery. Their coffins were wooden rather than stone. Their Book of the Dead might be a standard version with their name inserted, or even just key excerpts rather than the full collection of spells. The poorest Egyptians were buried in simple pits at the desert edge, wrapped in reed mats or old linen, with perhaps a few pottery vessels beside them. They received the same treatment as their predynastic ancestors 3,000 years earlier, yet the core belief transcended class. A poor farmer who lived justly, who had not stolen or murdered, who had honored the gods and spoke truth, could still hope to be justified in the hall of judgment. The Book of the Dead spell that declared innocence was the same whether written on expensive papyrus or recited from memory by a family member who had learned it orally. The theological promise was universal. The practical reality was stratified. Wealth could not buy moral justification, but it could buy better preservation, more powerful spells, and greater comfort in the tomb. The rich entered the afterlife with every advantage, just as they had lived with every advantage. This inequality troubled no one. Egyptian society was hierarchical by nature, ordained by the gods. The pharaoh was himself divine. Nobles held their positions by royal appointment and divine favor. That these distinctions continued beyond death seemed natural, proper, part of Ma'at itself. Angle 6. The technological/medical perspective mummification was sophisticated surgery performed on the dead. The embalmers worked in open-air workshops called the Beautiful House, or the Place of Purification, located near temple complexes or at the cemetery's edge. The smell was overwhelming, rotting flesh mixed with natron, resins, and spices. The work required steady hands and strong stomachs. The process began immediately after death. Delay meant decomposition, and decomposition meant failure. The body was first washed in water from the Nile, both for cleansing and symbolic rebirth. Then came the most delicate operation, brain removal. Using a long bronze hook inserted through the nostril, the embalmer broke through the ethmoid bone and hooked the brain tissue, pulling it out in pieces. This required skill. Too much force could damage the face, which needed to remain intact for identification in the afterlife. The cranial cavity was then rinsed with various substances and sometimes filled with resin. The abdominal incision was made on the left side, roughly 4 inches long. Through this opening, embalmers removed the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. Each organ was washed, treated with natron, and eventually wrapped and placed in its own canopic jar under the protection of one of the 4 sons of Horus. The heart was left in place. It would be needed for the weighing ceremony. The kidneys were usually left as well, perhaps because they were difficult to remove through the side incision, or perhaps because they were considered less important. The body cavity was then washed with palm wine. Its alcohol content helped prevent bacterial growth, and packed temporarily with linen or straw to maintain shape during desiccation. Natron was the critical substance. This naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, and sodium chloride was mined from dried lake beds in the Wadi Natron, about 40 miles northwest of Cairo. It absorbed moisture while having antibacterial properties. The Egyptians discovered its effectiveness through millennia of trial and error. The body was completely buried in natron for approximately 40 days. During this time, it lost roughly 75% of its original weight as all moisture was extracted. The result was a dried, leathery form that, if kept dry, would resist decay indefinitely. After removal from the natron, the body was washed again. The cavity was now packed permanently with linen, sand, or sawdust mixed with myrrh and other aromatics. The abdominal incision was closed, sometimes sewn, sometimes simply covered with a protective plate depicting the protective eye of Horus. Then came wrapping, a process that could take 15 days. Starting with the fingers and toes, embalmers wound linen strips around each digit individually. As they wrapped, priests recited spells and inserted amulets between layers. A scarab over the heart, the eye of Horus on the torso, protective symbols near vulnerable points. The face often received a final treatment. A linen mask might be placed over it, or resin poured to create a hard shell. By the late period, some mummies received painted cartonnage masks depicting the deceased in idealized form. The finished mummy bore little resemblance to the person who had died. It was transformed, harder, darker, perfumed with spices, wrapped in linen that could total more than 1,000 square feet of fabric. It was no longer simply a preserved corpse. It had become, through both technology and ritual, a vessel suitable for eternal existence. Modern scientific analysis of mummies reveals the sophistication involved. CT scans show precisely how thoroughly internal organs were removed. Chemical analysis identifies the specific resins used, some imported from as far as Lebanon or Somalia. Microscopic examination reveals even pollen grains trapped in the wrappings, telling us what plants were present during the burial season. The Egyptians developed this technology without microscopes, without understanding bacteria or cellular decay, without modern chemistry. They worked from observation, tradition, and religious necessity. The result was a preservation technique so effective that 3,000-year Old mummies remain identifiable today, their features still recognizable, their skin still intact, proof that the Egyptians' belief in physical preservation was justified by their remarkable skill. The moment arrives on a morning in 1279 BC. In a villa near Thebes, a high-ranking scribe named Hunefer draws his final breath. His wife and daughters are at his bedside. They have watched him weaken over days, his breath becoming shallow, his skin cooling. When the breathing stops, they know immediately what must be done. There is no time for prolonged grief, not yet. The body is already beginning its irreversible journey toward decay. Within hours, messengers are sent. The family's priest is summoned to begin the ritual procedures. Professional mourners are hired, women who will wail and tear their garments, who will throw dust on their heads and beat their breasts. Their performance of grief is not false. It is necessary, prescribed, part of the machinery that transforms death into rebirth. Most critically, embalmers are contacted. The body must reach their workshop before the sun sets again. That same day, Hunefer's corpse is carried on a wooden bier to the embalming house at the edge of the necropolis. The workshop is open-sided, allowing air to circulate and smoke from incense burners to disperse. Other bodies are already here in various stages of treatment, one being washed, another wrapped, a third decomposing under a mound of white natron crystals. The chief embalmer examines Hunefer's body. He was perhaps 50 years old, well-fed, showing signs of arthritis in his spine. The family has paid for the highest tier of service. Everything must be done correctly. 2 embalmers strip the body and wash it thoroughly with Nile water mixed with natron. They recite purification spells as they work. You are pure, you are pure, your ka is pure, your ba is pure. Then begins the irreversible work. An assistant holds Hunefer's head while the chief embalmer inserts a long bronze hook into the left nostril. He pushes carefully, feeling for the thin bone that separates the nasal cavity from the brain. A slight twist, and the bone breaks. The hook slides deeper. The brain cannot simply be pulled out whole. It must be liquefied first. The embalmer works the hook in circular motions, breaking up the tissue. Then he rotates the body, letting liquefied brain drain out through the nostrils. The process is repeated several times over the course of an hour. What remains is extracted piece by piece with the hooked instrument. The skull is then rinsed. A juniper-scented resin is poured in through the nostrils, then drained out. The cavity will be filled later with resin, soaked linen to prevent collapse of the facial features. Now comes the abdominal incision. Using a sharp flint blade, bronze dulls too quickly. An assistant called the cutter makes an incision on the left side of the abdomen, about 4 inches long, running parallel to the hip bone. This is considered a violation of the body, necessary but transgressive. According to tradition, the other embalmers ritually chase the cutter away with curses and thrown stones, a brief ceremony acknowledging that he has wounded the deceased. Through this opening, the chief embalmer reaches into the body cavity. He cuts the attachments holding the liver and pulls it out, placing it in a bowl of natron solution. Then the stomach. The intestines must be cut free from their mesentery attachments, a delicate process. The lungs require reaching up under the diaphragm. Each organ is examined, washed in palm wine, and set aside in its own container. The stomach goes to Dumutef, jackal-headed protector, the intestines to Kebesenuf, falcon, headed guardian, the lungs to Hapi, baboon, headed keeper, the liver to Mseti, who has a human face. The heart remains in the chest. Hunefer will need it for the judgment. The emptied body cavity is washed repeatedly, first with palm wine, then with water infused with crushed myrrh and cinnamon. The cavity is temporarily packed with linen to maintain the torso's shape. Day 2, the prepared organs have been drying in natron overnight. They are now wrapped individually in linen and placed in their canopic jars, each jar topped with a lid carved to represent its protective deity. These jars will be placed in the tomb near the coffin. The body itself is now covered completely in natron. Hunefer disappears under a mound of white crystals that cover the embalming table like snow. The natron must be pure, freshly collected from the Wadi Natron. Used natron loses its effectiveness and cannot be reused for another body. Days 3 through 40. The body lies under natron in the dry air. Embalmers check it periodically, adding fresh natron where needed. Moisture seeps constantly from the tissues, pooling beneath the table and draining away through channels carved in the stone floor. The body visibly shrinks. The flesh becomes leathery, the skin darkens. During this time, Hunefer's family is busy with other preparations. They commission a coffin from a carpenter who specializes in funerary work. They visit scribes to purchase papyri, multiple copies of essential spells from the Book of the Dead. They arrange for paintings in Hunefer's tomb, which was excavated years earlier, but whose decoration was never completed. Artists work now by lamplight, painting scenes of Hunefer offering to the gods, supervising his estate, enjoying eternal feasts. They gather grave goods, Hunefer's favorite staff, the scribble palette he used throughout his career, copper mirrors, cosmetic jars, linen garments, a board game with carved pieces, model boats, hundreds of Ushabti figures, each inscribed with his name. Every object must be ritually purified before placement in the tomb. Day 41. The natron is brushed away, revealing what Hunefer has become. His face is sunken but recognizable. His limbs are thin but intact. His skin is dark brown, taut over bone and dried muscle. He weighs perhaps a quarter of what he did at death. The embalmers wash the body again with water infused with spices. They massage it with oils and unguents, cedar oil, juniper oil, beeswax mixed with resin. This softens the dried skin slightly and provides a layer of protection. Some oils have aromatic properties. Others are simply expensive. Their use a demonstration of the family's devotion and wealth. The body cavity is now permanently packed. Linen bags filled with sawdust restore the torso's shape. These are mixed with crushed myrrh, frankincense, and other aromatics. The goal is not just preservation, but transformation. Hunefer must smell like the gods. The abdominal incision is closed. A sheet of gold foil depicting the Eye of Horus, the symbol of healing and protection, is placed over the cut. Some embalmers sew the incision shut with linen thread. Others simply seal it with resin. Resin is painted over the entire body surface, a thick, dark coating that will harden into a protective shell. While still tacky, the embalmers press amulets against the skin, a heart scarab over the chest, small figurines of protective deities near the shoulders and hips, gold sheets inscribed with spells at strategic points. Day 42, the wrapping begins. The wrapping of Hunefer takes 15 days. It begins with the fingers and toes, each digit wrapped individually in narrow strips of linen. The embalmers work methodically, reciting spells as they wind the fabric. O Osiris Hunefer, the bandage of Hathor is upon you. It protects you. It is strong for you. The hands and feet are wrapped next, then the arms and legs. Each limb receives multiple layers. Between the layers, small amulets are inserted, faience figurines of protective deities, copper plates inscribed with spells, tiny wadjet eyes of green, glazed ceramic. The torso wrapping is most elaborate. A large scarab carved from green stone is placed directly over Hunefer's heart. Its flat underside is inscribed with spell 30b from the Book of the Dead. O my heart of my mother, do not stand up against me as a witness. Do not speak against me in the tribunal. Do not tip the balance against me in the presence of the keeper of the scales. The head receives special attention. The embalmers pack the nostrils with resin, soaked linen to maintain the nose's shape. They place pads over the eyes. They wrap the head in multiple layers, leaving the face visible until the final stages. A priest applies gold leaf to the lips. Hunefer must be able to speak the spells in the afterlife. On the final day of wrapping, linen sheets are wound around the entire body, binding everything together. The total length of fabric used approaches 400 meters. The wrapped mummy is coated with warm resin, which soaks into the outer layers and hardens, creating a rigid protective shell. Hunefer's face is now covered with a painted cartonnage mask, showing him as he was in his prime, skin reddish brown, eyes lined with black coal, wearing the elaborate wig of his office. The mask is idealized, eternal, incorruptible. Day 70. The transformation is complete. The mummy is placed in its innermost coffin, a wooden case shaped like a human body, painted with protective spells and images of deities. This coffin fits inside a larger rectangular outer coffin, also decorated with texts and scenes. The whole assemblage is loaded onto a wooden sledge. The funeral procession begins at dawn. Professional mourners lead, wailing and throwing dust on their heads. Behind them come servants carrying grave goods on wooden trays, furniture, boxes of food, pottery vessels, everything Hunefer will need. Then the sledge bearing the coffin, pulled by oxen, with priests walking alongside holding incense burners and rattles called sistra. Hunefer's family follows, his widow, his children, his brothers and their families. Behind them come colleagues from the administration where he worked, fellow scribes, officials who served with him. Perhaps 200 people cross from the city of the living to the city of the dead, a procession visible from miles away as it winds toward the cliffs. At the tomb entrance, the most critical ritual begins, the opening of the mouth. The coffin is stood upright. A priest wearing the jackal mask of Anubis approaches with a set of specialized tools. First, an adze, a carpenter's tool with a copper blade set at right angles to the handle. He touches it to the coffin lid where the mouth would be. Your mouth was closed. I have ordered for you your mouth and your teeth. I open for you your 2 eyes. Next, the pesesh, kef blade, a ceremonial instrument shaped like a forked tongue. Another touch to the mouth area. I have opened your mouth with the instrument of Anubis. I have opened your mouth with the adze of iron with which the mouths of the gods were opened. An iron tool called the finger of Set is applied. Then the leg of a freshly slaughtered ox is touched to the coffins, symbolic transfer of life force and strength. With each implement, spells are recited. The ceremony reconstructs what Isis did for Osiris, what Horus did for his father. It transforms the inert mummy into a living act capable of eating, drinking, breathing, and speaking in the world beyond. The coffin is carried into the tomb and placed in the burial chamber. Grave goods are arranged around it. Final offerings of food and drink are presented. Then the tomb is sealed, the doorway filled with rubble, plastered over and stamped with official seals. But for Hunefer, the journey is just beginning. His consciousness awakens in darkness. He is in the Duat now, though he does not yet know where or how to proceed. This is the moment for which 70 days of preparation have been made. This is the test. He begins to recite the spells his family purchased for him, written on papyrus scrolls now lying in his coffin. I have come to you, Lord of the sacred land. I have traveled far. Let me not rot away. Let me not decompose. Let me not be turned back from your gates. The journey through the Duat unfolds in stages. Hunefer encounters the first gate and speaks its secret name. The guardian allows him to pass. He transforms into a falcon to fly over a lake of fire. He speaks words of power to banish serpent, demons that lunge at him from the darkness. He navigates by knowledge that was inscribed on his tomb walls, written on his papyri, recited during his burial. Finally, he arrives at the Hall of the Two Truths, the Hall of Judgment. The hall is vast, its ceiling supported by pillars, its walls lined with 42 divine judges, each responsible for evaluating one specific aspect of moral behavior. At the far end sits Osiris on his throne, his skin green like growing things, his body wrapped in burial linen, wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. Behind him stand Isis and Nephthys. In the center of the hall is a large balance scale. Beside it stands Anubis, jackal-headed, holding an ankh. Nearby waits Thoth, Ibis, headed god of writing, holding a scribe's palette ready to record the verdict. And in the shadows beneath the scales crouches Ammit, the devourer. Part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, she is chaos incarnate, the punishment for those who fail judgment. Hunefer approaches, his heart pounds in his chest, the only organ he still possesses, the witness that cannot lie. Anubis gestures to the scales. In one pan sits a single ostrich feather, the feather of Ma'at, representing truth, justice, cosmic order. It is impossibly light, yet it is the measure against which everything will be weighed. Come forward, Anubis commands, bring forth your heart. Hunefer's chest opens, and his heart, the ib that recorded every deed, every word, every thought of his life, is removed and placed in the empty pan of the scales. This is the moment everything depends upon. The heart is heavier than Hunefer expected. It contains not just good deeds, but mistakes, angers, moments of selfishness. Will it outweigh the feather? Will it be found wanting? Hunefer begins the negative confession, addressing each of the 42 judges in turn. Hail, wide Strider who comes from Heliopolis, I have not done evil. Hail, embracer of fire who comes from Babylon, I have not stolen. Hail, breaker of bones who comes from Heracleopolis, I have not told lies. He must deny 42 specific sins: theft, murder, blasphemy, adultery, false witness, cruelty to animals, tampering with grain measures, speaking evil, causing tears, causing pain. As he speaks, the scales remain motionless. The heart and the feather balance perfectly. Thoth watches carefully, ready to record any deviation. Ammit inches forward, her massive jaws slightly open, waiting. I have not killed. I have not commanded to kill. I have not caused suffering to anyone. I am pure. I am pure. I am pure. The final words echo in the vast hall. The scales hold steady. The heart and the feather remain perfectly balanced. Thoth nods and writes on his palette, justified. Anubis announces, his heart is true. No crime has been found against him. Let him not be given to Ammit. Let him be given offerings like those given to the followers of Horus. Osiris speaks from his throne, his voice resonant and final. Let him go forth into the field of reeds. Let him be among the blessed dead. Hunefer's heart is returned to his chest. He is transformed. He has become transfigured, justified, immortal. The journey through death is complete. The field of reeds, Aru in the Egyptian language, is where Hunefer will spend eternity. It is not a place of clouds and harps, not a realm of abstract spiritual bliss. It is Egypt itself perfected. The Nile flows here, but it never fails to flood. The fields stretch endlessly, but they require no back breaking labor. The sun shines warm but never scorching. There is no disease, no hunger, no thirst, no aging, no death. Hunefer finds himself standing in a landscape that feels familiar yet subtly wrong in its perfection. The barley grows to impossible heights, 7 cubits tall, according to the texts, with stalks as thick as a man's arm. The wheat ripens perpetually, golden and heavy with grain. The irrigation channels run with clear water that never stagnates or runs dry. He is not alone. Other justified dead inhabit this realm. Farmers who tended fields in life, now tending perfect fields in eternity. Priests who served the gods, now serving them directly. Scribes who recorded earthly accounts, now recording the deeds of the gods themselves. Everyone here has passed through the hall of judgment. Everyone here is transformed and justified, but existence here is not passive. The field of reeds is called the field of offerings for a reason. The justified dead are expected to work, plowing, sowing, reaping, maintaining the irrigation channels. This labor is effortless compared to earthly toil, yet it must be done. The cosmos requires contribution. Even in paradise, Maat demands balance. This is why Hunefer's tomb was filled with Ushabti figures. When he is called to work, he will speak the spell inscribed on these magical servants. O Ushabti, if I am called, if I am designated to do any work which is to be done in the realm of the dead, to cultivate the fields, to irrigate the banks, to transport sand from the east to the west, you shall say, here I am, I will do it. The Ushabti will answer instead. Hunefer can continue his eternal existence without interruption. He can visit his tomb, his Ba the bird, like aspect of his soul, can fly back to the world of the living, entering and exiting through the false door. He can receive the offerings his family brings. He can listen to the prayers they recite. He can see his children grow, his grandchildren born, his great-grandchildren marry and have children of their own. This connection between the living and the dead is crucial. In the tomb chapel above his burial chamber, Hunefer's son comes monthly to present offerings: bread, beer, incense, cool water. He recites the traditional formula, an offering which the king gives, an Osiris and Anubis. May they give invocation offerings for the Ka of the revered one, the justified Hunefer. The son believes his father can hear him. He believes the Ka consumes the spiritual essence of the food, even if the physical bread and beer remain on the offering table. He believes his father's continued existence depends partly on this remembrance, this sustenance, this speaking of the name. And he is correct. According to Egyptian understanding, the Ka requires offerings to maintain its existence. The memory requires refreshing. A person truly dies, the final death, the second death, the one that cannot be reversed, only when their name is no longer spoken, when no one brings offerings, when their tomb crumbles and their mummy decays to dust. This is why tomb inscriptions so frequently include the phrase, "May you speak my name." It is a plea across time. It is a request to any person who might someday stand before the tomb, any future visitor who might read the carved words. If you value life, if you want the gods to favor you, speak my name, say, an offering for Hunefer. Even if you have no physical offering, speak the words. By speaking them, you sustain me. The justified dead in the field of reeds are dependent on the living world in ways they never were during earthly life. They have achieved immortality, but it is an immortality that requires maintenance. They have become gods, but gods who need worshippers. Hunefer will exist in the field of reeds as long as Egypt exists, as long as his tomb stands, as long as anyone remembers his name. In a sense, he will exist as long as we exist, as long as archaeologists excavate tombs, as long as scholars translate hieroglyphs, as long as anyone anywhere speaks the name Hunefer or looks at images of him painted on tomb walls. The Egyptians understood something profound. Immortality is not a state, it is a relationship. It is maintained through memory, through ritual, through the living choosing to sustain the dead. This is why they built in stone rather than wood, why they carved names deep into granite, why they placed their tombs in the dry desert where nothing decays. They were building bridges across time, creating structures that would force future generations to remember them. And it worked. 3,000 years later, we know their names. We see their faces on coffins and tomb walls. We read their words. In a very real sense, they achieved exactly what they hoped for, not metaphorical immortality through leaving a legacy, but actual continued existence through sustained remembrance. But not everyone achieved this state. Not everyone passed through the hall of judgment. The Egyptians rarely depicted what happened to the unjustified. Their art focused on success, on the ideal outcome, on the eternal life they all hoped to achieve. But the texts acknowledge the alternative with stark clarity. Those whose hearts outweighed the feather of Maat faced Ammon. The devourer consumed them, not in the sense of physical eating, but in the sense of complete annihilation. The heart was destroyed, the ba dissolved, the ka ceased to exist. The person did not go to a place of punishment. They simply stopped being. This was the true terror in Egyptian belief. Not eternal torture, but eternal non-existence. To die, the second death, meant complete erasure from reality. No afterlife, no return, no memory, as if that person had never lived at all. The Egyptians considered this fate worse than any hell conceived by later religions. Pain eventually ends. Punishment might be survived, but non-existence is final, absolute, irreversible. We will never know how many Egyptians genuinely believed their hearts would balance against the feather. The spells and rituals suggest anxiety beneath the confidence. The very existence of spell 30b, the heart scarab spell that essentially commands the heart not to testify against its owner, reveals awareness that the judgment might not go well. Do not stand up against me as a witness, it pleads. Do not speak against me in the tribunal. But the texts also contain a more disturbing element. Some spells appear to be attempts to cheat the judgment, to magically force a positive outcome, regardless of the truth. The Egyptian afterlife was not primarily about moral transformation. It was about knowledge, preparation, and magical power. A person who knew the right spells might potentially deceive the judges, manipulate the weighing, and achieve justified status despite genuine moral failings. This pragmatic, almost legalistic approach to the afterlife distinguishes Egyptian belief from later religious systems based on grace, redemption, or divine mercy. The Egyptians approached death as a problem to be solved through correct procedures rather than a moral reckoning requiring repentance. The archaeological evidence for these beliefs is overwhelming. We have discovered more than 200 copies of the Book of the Dead in various forms. We have excavated thousands of tombs across Egypt, from simple pit graves to massive pyramid complexes. We have unwrapped hundreds of mummies, analyzed their preservation, catalogued their amulets. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 by Howard Carter provided unprecedented insight into royal burial practices. Despite being one of the least significant pharaohs, a boy king who ruled briefly and accomplished little, his tomb contained over 5,000 objects. The burial chamber held 4 gilded shrines nested inside each other, 3 coffins, a solid gold innermost coffin weighing nearly 250 pounds, and the famous death mask. If this was provided for a minor king, what must have been placed in the tombs of great pharaohs like Ramesses Roman II or Seti I? But those tombs were robbed in antiquity. Tomb robbery was so endemic that virtually every royal tomb in the Valley of the Kings was violated within decades of burial. The robbers knew exactly what they would find: gold, jewelry, precious oils, valuable furniture. They tunneled through walls, smashed through seals, and stripped the dead of their grave goods with systematic efficiency. Yet even robbery could not destroy the core belief. As long as the mummy remained relatively intact, as long as the name was still readable on tomb walls, the deceased could potentially continue existing. The grave goods were helpful but not essential. The spells painted on the walls could not be stolen. The name carved in stone endured. Egyptian afterlife beliefs evolved across the 3 millennia of pharaonic civilization. Old Kingdom beliefs centered on royal divinity and stellar immortality. Middle Kingdom theology democratized access and emphasized moral judgment. New Kingdom texts grew more elaborate, with longer spell collections and more detailed descriptions of the Duat's geography. Regional variations existed too. In Memphis, the creator god Ptah held special importance. In Hermopolis, the Ogdo, date primordial deities, featured prominently in creation myths. In Thebes, Amun rose to supreme importance during the New Kingdom, sometimes merging with Ra as Amun-Ra. Foreign conquests brought changes. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BC, Greek philosophical concepts began mixing with Egyptian beliefs. The Ptolemaic dynasty that followed maintained Egyptian religious practices. They built temples, sponsored priests, and presented themselves as legitimate pharaohs. But they also introduced Hellenistic ideas about the soul and afterlife. Under Roman rule from 30 BC onward, traditional practices gradually declined. Christianity, which arrived in the 1st century CE, offered an alternative afterlife theology. By the 4th century, when Christianity became the Roman Empire's official religion, the ancient rituals were actively suppressed. Temples were closed or converted to churches. The priests who maintained 3,000 years of tradition died without trained successors. The last hieroglyphic inscription we can date with certainty was carved in 394 CE at the Temple of Isis at Philae. After that, the written language fell silent. Within a generation, no one living could read the texts carved on every temple wall, painted in every tomb, written on thousands of papyri. The beliefs did not vanish immediately. Rural Egyptians continued mummifying their dead into the early Christian centuries, though without the old rituals or spells. But gradually the knowledge was lost, the tombs were abandoned, the temples crumbled, the desert reclaimed the cemeteries. Yet the legacy endured in unexpected ways. Early Christian concepts of bodily resurrection may have been influenced by Egyptian ideas of physical preservation and renewal. Islamic beliefs about the questioning of the dead in the grave show possible connections to older Egyptian concepts of judgment. The human desire for concrete, detailed knowledge about the afterlife, evident in Egyptian texts, appears in medieval Christian visions of heaven and hell, in Islamic descriptions of paradise. More fundamentally, the Egyptians established a pattern still visible in modern attitudes toward death. The impulse to prepare, to plan, to control the uncontrollable through ritual and knowledge. Contemporary funeral practices, embalming, viewing the body, elaborate ceremonies, placing meaningful objects in the coffin echo ancient Egyptian instincts. The Egyptians believed death was a journey that could be navigated successfully with proper preparation. 3,000 years after their civilization fell, we still prepare our dead for journeys we hope they will take, still place meaningful objects with them, still speak their names to keep their memory alive. The specific theology has changed, the fundamental human response to mortality has not. Stand in the Egyptian galleries of any major museum, and you are surrounded by preparations for death. The coffins, the amulets, the canopic jars, the papyri covered in spells. Every object represents someone's desperate hope that death was not an ending. A priest who saved for years to afford his burial. A noblewoman who commissioned her book of the dead decades before she would need it. A pharaoh who spent his reign constructing a tomb he prayed he would occupy for eternity. The Egyptians were not morbid. They loved life with an intensity evident in their tomb paintings, scenes of feasting, hunting, music, laughter. They painted their walls with every pleasure they hoped to continue enjoying forever. Their elaborate preparations for death were not a rejection of life, but an affirmation of it. Life was so precious, so worth living, that they refused to accept its ending. What the Egyptians understood, with a clarity that subsequent civilizations have obscured, is that immortality requires work. It is not a gift passively received. It must be built in stone, in ritual, in memory. They knew that to be remembered is to continue existing in a way that matters. They knew that a name spoken aloud creates a presence, however brief, however faint. 3 millennia have passed since the last hieroglyphic text was carved. The priests are dead, the rituals are forgotten, the gods no longer receive offerings. Yet, when we stand before a painted coffin and read the name inscribed upon it, when we speak that name, even silently in our minds, we are doing exactly what the Egyptians asked us to do. We are sustaining them across impossible distances of time. They were wrong about the Duat's geography. They were wrong about the gods who judged them. They were wrong about the mechanics of the soul's transformation. But they were profoundly right about one thing: memory is a form of immortality. To be remembered is to remain, in some sense, alive. The truth about the afterlife in ancient Egypt is not what happens after death. We cannot know that, and neither could they. The truth is what they made happen before death: the monuments they built, the texts they wrote, the names they carved so deeply into stone that erosion itself could not erase them. We remember them. In remembering, we prove their theology was not entirely wrong. They achieved what they sought, not in the field of reeds, not among the stars, but here, in this world, in the minds of people who live 3,000 years later and still speak their names with something approaching reverence. That is the truth about the afterlife they created for themselves. Not eternal life in another realm, but a bridge across time built from stone and memory, and the simple human refusal to let death have the final word.